Welcome to Corporate Evolution, how business leaders are building a more adaptive company. Well, if one message has come through from the last year, it is surely that digital transformation that we've all been forced to experience is not easy. But when you run organizations responsible for banking, defense, commodities like oil trading, if you get it wrong, the consequences are anywhere from serious to frightening. We do have the great pleasure of hearing from an investor in digital transformation from banks across the world to getting Wi-Fi on planes, CEO of Ripplewood Advisors, Tim Collins, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Time. Take off your mask, relax. Delighted to also have us joined virtually by the CEO of Airbus Defence and Space, Dirk Hoke, and CEO and Executive Chairman of Trafigura in Switzerland, Jeremy Weir. So, Tim, let's start with some of the challenges. Given your portfolio of companies, what business weaknesses did you see exposed by the pandemic?
So, there's so many that I wrote them down. In all seriousness, I think I do everybody a disservice this late in the day in our time to give a long list of the things that have shown up. I would say just two things. One, everyone has learned that we are more reliant on governments as businesses, as institutions, as individuals than we ever thought. And that in that regard, we have learned that competence may be more important than ideology. And I think, not to name the negative examples, but in the past year, we have obviously had a lot of pandemic shocks and other shocks. And places like the Kingdom and the UAE and the neighborhood have done a remarkable job of adapting and of showing great competence. And so I think that's the first thing that we learned, is that we are vulnerable or influenced by governments, and that competence is really important factor in the way we organize ourselves and where we invest. The second thing is just a very simple thing, and thousands of more obvious things I won't bother enumerating, but we have learned to plan differently. We have learned plan beats no plan. That's not new. But we've learned to be dynamically planning, and we've learned to plan in pencil, and we've learned to iterate, and we've learned how important, people write about it, but we've learned to feel how important buffers, cushions, resilience, alternatives, scenario testing. We've learned that the world's unpredictable. We all knew that, but we now feel it. And I think in our business processes here in the Kingdom, at Banque Saudi Fransi, at Citadel in the Baltics, in EFG in Egypt, everybody's been faced with a brand new hand of cards weekly. And so learning to take out the eraser, start all over again, real-time iteration has been, I think, something that we didn't do well at the beginning, and we're doing much better now.
Jeremy, one of the most amazing moments last year was when the oil price went below zero. We heard Tim mention there the COVID shocks. You helped deal with the implications of that. What happened? You provided storage at sea, for example. Tell us more of that story.
Sure, it really was an extraordinary time. I mean, if you recall, during sort of the first quarter, and I think it was in March, where you saw increased supply being announced by OPEC. And at the same time, we started to see the impacts of the pandemic. That saw the demand destruction in oil consumption by about 25%, 20 to 25%, and far more in aviation. So it was really the perfect storm. We were quite fortunate in that, through our global footprint and the network that we have, not that we ever foresaw extreme volatility that we did witness, nor did we ever expect to see negative oil prices. But what we did expect to see was, an issue around storage, an issue around supply chains, and then how do we as an organizer react and service our customer base and provide continuity of business, because we really did see a very distressed market at that time. And what we did actually, we did sort of secure additional storage. We had some clear indications of what demand destruction may do, for example, in China, where we have a significant footprint of business. So therefore, to some degree, prepared. And we were able to position ourselves, even on in the shipping side. We increased our shipping fleet by 70%, leading into this sort of issue or this demand destruction. And so therefore able to ensure that we could actually move the cargoes, buy the cargoes, and ensure that we had continuity of supply chain. And that was extremely important during that time. And I should add, that was at a time actually when, during April, when we had most of our employees working from home, and it was our busiest month ever for our sort of 27-year history. So a lot of challenges to deal with during that period.
Fascinating. Dirk, let's come to you. I know that even before you took over as CEO of Airbus Defence and Space, you were passionate about digitalization. It isn't easy, however, in an industry where there are very strict rules around who can use the cloud due to cybersecurity. So how were you able to accelerate digitalization during COVID?
Yeah, it's especially quite a complicated task in a company where you have 4 home nations, and you work, of course, in 4 classified environments for the national data. And then, of course, when I joined Airbus Defence and Space, we created, for example, an international layer in order to be able to communicate cross-national borders. And we started the digital transformation already in 2016, which was, of course, very useful now during the pandemic. But in the pandemic, we, for example, were forced to increase our VPN connections overnight, literally. In a few weeks, we increased almost by 20,000 VPN connections in order to enable our people to work from home and other remote locations. And this happened almost seamless. So we were able to keep our teams up and working through the whole year. And I think we can be very proud. The whole team ensured that we were able to deliver on our products and systems throughout the year on time, and we're able to compensate the pandemic effect through 2020.
Let's go from defense and space back to banks. So Tim, you've invested in banks across the world. This is not the first challenge that the banking industry has faced in the last even couple decades, shall we say. What innovations that we might not have heard of emerged during the pandemic?
Lots. I think most of the innovations that we're all feeling are things that were inevitable but have been accelerated. Digital and mobile are obvious. I think the thing that is less obvious and is becoming a point of difference is very subtle, but I think there are really 2 things that when I look around the world that are probably a better or a more salient lesson in this crisis and in past crises. Number 1, credit underwriting is a source of competitive advantage. Being able to iterate, evaluate, analyze in a dynamic way is becoming a true, it was, but it's becoming obvious as
and AI-enabled, is that?
AI-enabled, old-fashioned arithmetic, all of it. Superior credit underwriting is becoming clearly a powerful source of competitive advantage. And the second thing that's really not obvious, but I think as I wander around, I think many institutions, banks included, are finding that for their organizations, for their customers, for their communities, having a distinct sense of purpose is becoming a source of competitive advantage in recruiting people, in retaining people, in motivating and directing. And I think that out of this whole mess, or multiple messes, I think banks in particular are learning to find their place in society and realize that it's a really critical thing that they are able to articulate all the way down in the organization.
So purpose, an important aspect. I think partnership was one of the other words that I've heard so many times in terms of how we're going to build back. Dirk, while competition hasn't disappeared for you, I know that partnership, collaboration has become important in the last 12 months. I know you've been working, in fact, with a competitor on the Future Combat Air System. I wonder if you could have even seen that as a possibility 5-10 years ago.
5-10 years ago, not, but 4 years ago, because then that was the time when I started to reach out to our competitor to discuss a potential cooperation in a larger European sense. And this was something that you couldn't expect at that time. And it took us quite a while to convince the other party that this is a win-win situation. And especially that based on the Franco-German cooperation, we can build a European foundation in order to focus European defense strategy and also the European defense procurement for the years to come, in order to ensure that we are less fragmented and that, of course, Europe can also take its role in defense strategy on a global basis. So it was not easy, and I think you need to make a lot of compromises. Of course, you learn in Europe a lot about diversity, and that we have, of course, a different cultural background, different mentalities. But at the end, I think what is also clearly obvious is that we are based on the same value system, which is at the end helping to build a common ground and a win-win situation. So right now, I think we have proven in the Future Combat Air System already that we can do this. We have now already onboarded also Spain, and we have now a Franco-German-Spanish cooperation. And I'm a strong believer that this is a strong foundation for a future European defense cooperation.
So, Jeremy, let's look ahead. We have a new US administration accelerating the energy transition. Every time I open my New York Times app, there's another announcement. What does this mean to you from an investment perspective?
There's obviously been, during the pandemic, we've seen a significant shift or a gain of momentum with respect to sort of decarbonisation and what that means to sort of investment across the globe. It's not just for the US, but it's also China, what they've announced, the Green Deal in Europe as well. And what this means really is a significant increase in demand in the metals, particularly those metals involved in electrification. So, for example, in copper, which is used obviously for not in solar panels, in just grids, but also in general infrastructure, in aluminium or aluminum, in nickel, in cobalt for batteries. So this is a huge amount of expenditure in these particular metals, which is going to be fundamental to the change. What we're doing as an institution, we've announced a power renewables trading division. We've announced some investments in solar and wind in a joint venture, 2 gigawatts of energy, renewable energy. We've also some investments in hydrogen. It's a very interesting space, and I think it has got a lot of momentum behind it. And it's just the start of a big move, I believe, in the metals markets.
How are you going to do that ethically?
We have a responsible sourcing sort of program within our business. More and more institutions and our customer base want to know where they get their metals from. We have a proper auditing process which we've put together, and so they were able to provide that. And this is, we're one of many companies doing the same sort of thing. And if you look at the mining industry, they're also looking at the sort of their ESG footprint and how they can comply with the requirements of stakeholders and provide ethical sourcing of materials.
Tim, tell me through your investment perspective, where are the next great opportunities in the next 5-10 years?
Where are the next? Well, look, I think I just say one thing, and that is Nietzsche, anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So the survivors of this mess will provide great opportunities. But I just repeat the things that I said before. In our view, we are looking at innovators and disruptors in markets where our public sector partners are highly competent and forward-looking, and we are looking to be investing in organizations and building organizations that are highly purposeful. And we think, that's a whole new set of due diligence and strategic levers. I spend a lot of my time here with Banque Saudi Fransi. They are fully partnered with the government and with the community to try to be a part of this radical transformation that's going on here. And that's that's sort of not only music to our hearts, but to our wallets. We think that's a very, very important part of future successful investments.
Dirk, let me give you the final word. You've got two aspects to your business, both defense and space. How did that duality help Airbus in the last year?
Yeah, we saw that the space business was affected by COVID-19 more than the defense business. For example, our Kourou launch site in French Guiana was closed for several months, which delayed the sequence of launching. And this, of course, had an immediate impact to our business. But at the other side, we saw on the defense side that our home nations were willing to accelerate contract, to even discuss accelerated payment terms, and to support us throughout the year in different perspectives. So we were able to stabilize the whole division by balancing the aspects on the defense side towards the space side. What we also saw is that we were looking after the supply chain, because in our industry we have many suppliers that are single source, and if we would lose them, it would destabilize the whole industry. And we were able to support the suppliers with the help of the governments in order to make sure that also for the years to come we have a stable supply chain. And this was mostly coming from the defense business.
Dirk, Jeremy, and Tim, thank you very much for joining me here on stage, and digitally here in Riyadh.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.